When I think about Bill's professional excellence, I don't simply think of a man who did his job well. I think of a man who elevated everything he touched, who carried himself with such integrity that it was impossible not to respect him. Excellence for Bill wasn't just about results. It was about how he approached life. The discipline, the preparation, the quiet sacrifices that most people never saw. I'll tell you, I've learned in my own life that excellence does not come cheaply. There were seasons where I had to wrestle with failure, where doors were closed in my face, and where people told me that I wasn't enough or wouldn't make it. I know what it feels like to walk through disappointment, to face moments where giving up seems easier than pushing forward. And yet, those very trials have a way of shaping you. They teach you that greatness isn't built on comfort, but on persistence through adversity. That's where I find such a deep connection with Bill's story, because he too knew what it meant to rise above challenges, to keep going when others might have stopped. Bill carried himself with a quiet determination that spoke louder than words. He didn't brag about his accomplishments, but you couldn't help but notice them. He was the kind of man who made excellence look effortless, though we all know the truth. It never is. Excellence takes late nights, early mornings, countless sacrifices, and often struggles that no one else ever sees. I know what it's like to feel the weight of expectations, to press forward when you're tired, to stay faithful when you don't see immediate rewards. And when I look back on those moments in my life, I see how perseverance becomes the fuel that carries you into new seasons. Bill lived that out every single day. He didn't just excel for himself. What made his excellence so powerful was that it inspired others. When people saw Bill at work, they didn't just see a man doing a job, they saw a model, a standard to reach for. Excellence has a way of lifting others, and Bill's example pushed people to become better. I remember facing moments in my own journey where I doubted if my effort would matter, but then I think of those who were watching me, those who needed to see someone refuse to quit. That's what Bill embodied. The realization that excellence is never just about us. It's about the impact it leaves behind. Now, I'll be honest. There were times in my life when I was weary, when the road was hard, when success seemed distant. And in those seasons, the temptation was real. To settle for less, to cut corners, to do just enough to get by. But men like Bill remind us that settling is never the answer. They remind us that the greatest victories are often on the other side of perseverance. His excellence wasn't about perfection. It was about consistency. It was about showing up day after day with the same commitment, the same passion, the same drive to do things the right way. And maybe that's what makes his legacy so meaningful. Excellence wasn't a performance for him. It was his character on display. When I look at the hardships I've walked through, I realize now that they weren't setbacks at all. They were training grounds, preparing me to stand firm when the weight grew heavy. Bill understood that too. He allowed life's difficulties to refine him instead of define him. That's why his work carries such power, why his reputation stands tall even now. So when we speak of Bill's professional excellence, we're not just talking about achievements, titles, or accolades. We're talking about the spirit of a man who refused to compromise, who gave his best even when it cost him, who lifted others simply by being faithful to his calling. That to me is true greatness. And that to me is what makes honoring Bill so important today, because excellence leaves a trail. It sets a standard that doesn't fade when the man is gone. It calls the rest of us higher, challenges us not to be content with mediocrity, and shows us the power of dedication. That's the gift Bill has left us. That's the example he set, and that is a legacy worth remembering. Thank you. When I think about Bill, one of the qualities that always stood out was his passion for learning. He never treated knowledge as something you acquire once and put away. For him, learning was a lifelong pursuit, something to be embraced every single day. He believed that growth didn't stop when you reached a certain age, or when you gained a certain position, or when you thought you already knew enough. No, for Bill, every day was an opportunity to stretch, to listen, to dig deeper, and to discover something new. That passion speaks to me deeply because I know from my own journey how powerful the pursuit of learning can be. There were times in my life when I thought I had it figured out, only to have life humble me, showing me that I still had so much more to understand. And there were seasons where I was desperate for answers, struggling to find direction, looking for wisdom that wasn't easy to come by. I remember nights when I wrestled with questions that seemed bigger than me, when I didn't know which way to turn. And in those moments, it was learning, being willing to listen, to open my heart, to keep seeking, that carried me forward. Bill had that same spirit. He wasn't content with surface level understanding. He was always digging deeper. If he read a book, he wasn't just skimming the pages. He was asking, what can I take from this? How can I apply it? How can I share it? When he listened to someone, he didn't just hear the words. He paid attention to the meaning, the lesson behind what was being said. That kind of hunger, that kind of openness is rare. And it made him not just wiser, but more compassionate, because learning shaped not only his mind, but also his heart. I know what it's like to have to learn the hard way. I've walked through struggles that taught me lessons I didn't want to learn at the time. I've faced setbacks that left me asking why, only to realize later that those seasons were classrooms I couldn't have entered any other way. Pain teaches, disappointment teaches, failure teaches. And when you allow those lessons to sink in, when you don't run from them, they make you stronger, more patient, more understanding. Bill understood that. He knew that learning wasn't just about textbooks or degrees, it was about life itself. He embraced every experience, whether success or struggle, as an opportunity to grow. That's one of the reasons so many people admired him. Because when you carry that kind of passion for learning, it spills over, it influences those around you. People didn't just respect Bill for what he knew. They were inspired by the way he kept learning, the way he stayed curious, the way he believed there was always more to discover. He didn't hoard what he learned either. He shared it. He invested it in others. He lifted people up with the wisdom he gained, making sure that what he learned didn't end with him, but continued in the lives of others. I can tell you in my own walk, there have been people who poured their knowledge into me, who took the time to teach me when I was still finding my way. And now, when I look back, I realize those lessons weren't just about information. They were about transformation. That's what Bill did. He didn't just accumulate knowledge for himself. He used it to shape lives, to build people, to encourage them to keep growing too. And isn't that the kind of passion we all need? A passion that refuses to settle, that says, I can still learn, I can still grow, I can still become more. Bill modeled that beautifully. And what's remarkable is that his pursuit of learning wasn't prideful. He didn't study or explore so that he could show off. He did it because he genuinely wanted to be better, and because he believed that every lesson, every insight, every new piece of wisdom could make him more effective in serving others. I've had to learn that same truth in my own life. There were times when the weight of responsibility felt overwhelming, when I felt unprepared for what was in front of me. And in those moments, I realized that the only way forward was to remain a student, to keep learning, to keep asking, to keep leaning into wisdom that was beyond me. That humility, that willingness to stay teachable is what I saw so clearly in Bill. And it's one of the greatest gifts he leaves behind for all of us. So when we talk about Bill's passion for learning, we're not just remembering a man who loved knowledge. We're honoring someone who understood that growth is a lifelong journey, who modeled humility and curiosity, who inspired others to never stop seeking, never stop asking, never stop stretching towards something great. His example calls us all to remain students of life, to embrace both the joys and the struggles as lessons that shape us. And that, my friends, is a legacy worth holding on to. Thank you. When I think about Bill, I can't help but reflect on the countless lives he touched through his mentorship and his guidance. You see, it wasn't just what he achieved for himself that made him remarkable, but what he poured into others along the way. He understood something so many people overlook, that true greatness isn't measured by how high you climb, but by how many you bring with you. Bill never hoarded his wisdom or guarded his experience as if it were his own private treasure. He freely gave it, generously shared it, and patiently invested it in anyone who was willing to learn. That resonates with me deeply because I know what it feels like to walk through life searching for direction. I've been in places where the path ahead wasn't clear, where the weight of decisions pressed heavy on me, and where I longed for someone to step in and say, Here's the way, let me walk with you. There were times I stumbled, times I made choices out of inexperience or fear, and times I wished I had a hand to steady me. In those seasons, I came to understand the immeasurable value of a mentor, someone who sees not just who you are, but who you can become. Bill was that kind of man. He had this way of noticing people, of looking past the surface and seeing potential, even when others overlooked it. He had patience to listen, to sit with you in your struggles, to speak truth with compassion. And when he offered advice, it wasn't with a heavy hand, but with a gentle strength, the kind that didn't push you down, but lifted you up. He guided people not by forcing them into his mold, but by helping them discover their own voice, their own strength, their own path. That's a rare gift, and it's one he gave freely. In my own journey, I've had to learn the hard way what it means to be both guided and to guide. There were seasons where I felt like I was on my own, carrying burdens heavier than I thought I could bear. I remember nights when the silence felt overwhelming, when I was wrestling with doubts and didn't know if I had what it took to keep moving forward. In those times, the smallest words of encouragement, the simplest gestures of guidance became lifelines. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I could take another step. And that's exactly what Bill provided to so many people. The steadying hand, the reassuring voice, the reminder that you are capable of more than you think. He didn't just mentor in words, though. He mentored in how he lived. His consistency, his integrity, his faithfulness, those were lessons in themselves. People learned from Bill not only because of what he said, but because of what they saw. He showed them how to handle success with humility, how to endure struggle with courage, and how to walk through life with grace. That kind of example leaves a mark that doesn't fade because it's written not on paper, but on people's hearts. I know what it is to struggle through seasons where you feel like no one sees you, like no one understands the weight you carry. And I know how transformational it is when someone steps in and says, I see you, I believe in you, I'm here for you. Bill did that for so many, and the ripple effects of his mentorship can't even be measured. Every life he encouraged has gone on to touch countless others, carrying his wisdom forward in ways even he may not have realized. And isn't that the power of true guidance? It doesn't end with one conversation, one lesson, or one relationship. It multiplies, it spreads. It creates a legacy of growth and strength that outlives the mentor himself. Bill's fingerprints are on lives, on families, on communities, because he chose to give of himself, to take the time to care enough to guide. Looking back at my own life, I can see now how the challenges I faced were also invitations to mentor others. The hardships I walked through became lessons I could pass on, not because I had all the answers, but because I understood the struggle. That's what Bill modeled. He didn't mentor from a pedestal. He mentored from a place of shared humanity. He knew what it was to struggle, to grow, to wrestle with life's demands, and he let that reality shape the way he poured into others. So when we remember Bill's mentorship and guidance, we remember a man who lived beyond himself, who refused to let his wisdom stop with him, who saw people not just as they were, but as they could be. He reminds us that the greatest investment we can make is in people, that the truest legacy we can leave is the lives we've lifted. And that is exactly what Bill did. He lifted us. Thank you. When we talk about Bill, it's impossible not to talk about the love and dedication he showed to his family and his friends. His accomplishments, his wisdom, his leadership, all of that was powerful, but the true measure of who he was could be seen most clearly in the way he cherished the people closest to him. For Bill, family wasn't just a word, and friendship wasn't just a label. They were commitments, sacred bonds that he poured himself into. He gave the best of himself not only to his work and community, but also to the people he loved most. That's something that touches me deeply, because I know from my own journey how life can sometimes test those relationships. I've had moments where the pressures of responsibility pulled me in every direction, where it felt like there wasn't enough time in the day to carry everything that was on my shoulders. And in those seasons, I learned how easy it can be to let the urgent overshadow the important, to get caught up in the grind and forget that the people closest to you are the ones who need you most. I've walked through times where I've had to stop and remind myself that titles fade, achievements are forgotten, but the love you give to your family and friends, that's what endures. Bill understood that better than most. He had this way of making people feel seen. If you were his family, you knew you were his priority. If you were his friend, you knew you could count on him. And it wasn't just in the big moments, it was in the quiet ones. It was in the phone call he made when he knew you were going through something. It was in the smile across the table that said, "I'm glad you're here." It was in the sacrifices no one else saw, but that his family and friends felt every day. That kind of dedication doesn't come from obligation, it comes from love. I know what it's like to wrestle with the tension of wanting to be there for everyone and yet feeling the weight of not always being enough. I've experienced the ache of missing important moments, the guilt of being stretched too thin, and the longing to do right by the people who mean the most to me. Those struggles have taught me that relationships take intentionality, that love isn't just spoken but shown in consistent, tangible ways. And when I look at Bill's life, I see a man who lived that out faithfully. His family was his anchor, his friends his joy. He didn't just provide for them, he was present with them. He didn't just say he cared, he showed it. And because of that, his home, his relationships, his circle of friends were filled with warmth and strength. They knew his heart, they knew his loyalty. They knew that no matter what he achieved outside, what mattered most to him was what was inside. The people who shared his life. What stands out to me is how his love didn't stop at the people who bore his last name. His circle of family seemed to grow wider every year because he treated friends like family too. He didn't put up walls around his love. He opened his arms, and anyone who came close enough felt that care. And that to me is the sign of someone who truly understood the gift of relationships, that they are not to be taken for granted, but to be treasured, nurtured, and invested in. I can't tell you how many times in my own life I've had to learn, sometimes painfully, that people are the real wealth we carry. Titles fade, bank accounts rise and fall, opportunities come and go. But when you've got family and friends who stand by you, when you've invested in them and they've invested in you, that's when you're truly rich. Bill lived rich in that way, not because of possessions, but because of people. And it's a richness that can't be measured in dollars or accolades, but in the love that surrounded him, in the loyalty that his friends carry, in the devotion of his family who knew how much he loved them. Bill's dedication reminds us of something we all need to hold close. That at the end of the day, what matters most is not the things we've done, but the people we've loved. It's not about how much we've gathered, but about how much we've given of ourselves to those who share life with us. And Bill gave generously of his time, his energy, his heart. That is why his absence leaves such a deep void and why his memory carries such strength. Because love leaves a mark that never fades. And the dedication Bill showed to his family and his friends will continue to echo in their hearts for the rest of their lives. Thank you. When I think about Bill, one of the things that always shines brightest in my memory is his service to the community. He wasn't the kind of man who believed life was just about what you could take from it. He believed it was about what you could give back. He saw the needs around him, and instead of turning away, he leaned in. He chose to be present, to make a difference, to give his time, his energy, his resources, and most importantly, his heart. Now that strikes me deeply because I know from my own journey that service doesn't always come when it's easy. There were times in my life when I was worn down, when I was struggling just to keep myself afloat, when I questioned whether I had anything left to give. There were days I felt like life had taken more from me than I had to offer. When my own battles made me want to withdraw, to focus only on my own survival. But it was in those very seasons that I learned something powerful. Even when you feel empty, giving of yourself can pour life back into you. Service has a way of healing both the giver and the receiver. Bill understood that. He didn't wait until everything was perfect in his own world before he started helping others. He didn't wait until it was convenient or until he had all the answers. He simply showed up again and again with a willing heart. And the beauty of his service was that it wasn't always grand or flashy. Sometimes it was the quiet, unseen acts of kindness, the visit, the word of encouragement, the helping hand when no one else was around. Other times it was stepping into bigger efforts that strengthened the community, lending his gifts and his influence for the good of others. But in every act, big or small, his heart was the same. To serve, to love, to make a difference. I've had my share of seasons where I didn't think I had the strength to step beyond my own struggles. times when I felt weighed down by disappointment or failure, wondering if I could keep going. And yet, I've also seen how even in those moments, when I chose to serve someone else, something shifted inside of me. Because when you pour into others, you often find that you yourself are being filled in the process. That's what made Bill's life so extraordinary. He lived out that truth daily. He didn't see service as a burden. He saw it as a calling. And you know, when you serve the community, you're not just helping individuals, you're shaping generations. Bill's service planted seeds that will keep growing long after him. The young people he encouraged, the neighbors he supported, the causes he lifted, those ripples will spread farther than we can see. That's the nature of service. You may not always see the full impact, but the lives touched become part of your legacy. What inspires me most about Bill is that he served with joy. Even when it cost him time, even when it meant sacrifice, even when it wasn't easy. He did it with a smile, with gratitude, with a spirit that said, I'm here because this matters. And people felt that. They didn't just receive his help. They received his heart. And that's what makes service powerful. It's not just the act, it's the love behind the act that transforms lives. I can tell you from my own experience, there were days when serving others pulled me through my own pain. When I was weighed down by challenges, giving my time to someone else reminded me that life was bigger than my problems. It reminded me that my struggles didn't define me, and that even in my weakness, I could still be a source of strength for someone else. That's what Bill embodied. He didn't serve because life was easy. He served because he knew it was necessary. And when you look around, you can see the fruit of his dedication everywhere. People who might have fallen through the cracks were lifted because he cared. Organizations grew stronger because he gave his support. Hearts were encouraged because he took the time to notice and to respond. His service wasn't just something he did, it was who he was. That's the kind of legacy that challenges all of us, because service calls us higher. It reminds us that the measure of our lives isn't in what we keep, but in what we give. Bill lived that truth faithfully, and because of that, his influence will keep living on in the community he served so well. Thank you. When we come to the end of reflecting on Bill's life, what stands above everything else is the enduring legacy he leaves behind. A man's legacy is not just about the things he accomplished while he walked this earth, but about what continues long after he is gone. It's about the principles he stood for, the values he instilled, and the lives he impacted in ways that ripple forward into the future. Bill's legacy is not bound by the years he lived. It stretches into the lives of those he touched, into the lessons he left us, and into the example we now carry with us. I can tell you from my own life, I've had moments where I wondered if what I was doing would outlast me. I've wrestled with seasons where the work felt heavy and the fruit seemed small, where I questioned whether my struggles, my sacrifices, my pain would amount to anything that would remain. I've stood in those places where you feel unseen, where you wonder if your life will really make a difference. And it's in those moments that I've learned that legacy is not built overnight. It's carved out in the daily decisions, the unseen sacrifices, the quiet acts of faithfulness that others may never applaud, but that shape the lives around you. Bill understood that truth. He didn't chase legacy as if it were a prize to be won. He simply lived with such consistency, such purpose, and such heart that legacy became the natural outcome of who he was. He lived with integrity when no one was watching. He showed kindness without expecting anything in return. He worked with excellence even when the world wasn't taking notice. And over time, those choices created something lasting, something that even death cannot erase. I've known the sting of loss. I've walked through valleys where loved ones were taken too soon, where grief pressed down heavy on my soul. In those times, I clung to the reality that though people may leave this earth, their legacy never does. Their voice continues in the lessons they taught us. Their spirit continues in the love they gave us. Their presence continues in the way we carry forward what they stood for. And that's what comforts us when we think about Bill. Though he is not here physically, he is still here in the best of ways. In the values we hold tighter because of him. In the faith we live stronger because of him. In the compassion we extend further because of him. Legacy is not about statues or monuments. It's about people. It's about the family that rises stronger because of the foundation a man laid. It's about the community that thrives because of the seeds he planted. It's about the friends who walked with a deeper sense of purpose because of the encouragement he gave. That's what Bill left behind. And as we carry his memory, we also carry his mission. His story now becomes part of ours. I'll be honest with you, I've stumbled at times. I've had failures I wish I could erase, mistakes I've had to learn from, seasons where I felt more broken than whole. And yet, in looking at the lives of men like Bill, I've learned that legacy isn't about perfection. It's about perseverance. It's about getting back up when you fall. It's about staying faithful to what matters most, even when life tries to pull you off course. That's the kind of legacy Bill has shown us. Not a flawless life, but a faithful one. Not a loud life, but a lasting one. And now the responsibility rests on us because legacy is not meant to be admired from a distance. It's meant to be carried forward. What Bill instilled in his family and his friends and his community, it doesn't end here. It lives on through the choices we make, through the way we treat each other, through the way we serve, through the way we keep learning, through the way we give the best of ourselves as he did. In that way, Bill's life becomes more than just a memory. It becomes a movement, something that keeps living and breathing in us. So when we talk about his enduring legacy, we are talking about more than remembrance. We are talking about responsibility. We are talking about honoring him by living out the values he stood for. We are talking about ensuring that what he gave us does not end with us, but flows through us to the next generation. That is how legacy endures. That is how his impact remains alive. And so, though we may grieve his absence, we celebrate his presence because Bill's life will continue to speak, to inspire, to guide, and to challenge us for years to come. Thank